Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. Today, we're going to be talking with Matthew Keough from the Parks Department about what plans are upcoming for Sakai Park, including plans for some tennis courts. Before we get to that, though, I want to thank Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which sponsors Something to Talk About. They offer assisted and independent living and memory care up on Rolling Bay. You can find out more about that and their day stay and respite programs by calling 206-594-1010. Ask for Celia or Jamie. Also, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water, who have lived along the Salish Sea since time immemorial, and we are honoring them today and every day, grateful for their sharing of their learning about how to be good stewards of these lands and waters. Matthew, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. I appreciate it. I happen to see that although the pool bond is probably the biggest park topic on everybody's mind right now, there are big plans for making some changes at Sakai, and I know that tennis courts have been on people's mind as well. So thanks.
It is a pleasure to be with you. I have just tried to share the screen, so maybe you could confirm.
Yep, there you are.
Great. Well, again, I'm Matthew. I'm with the Bainbridge Island Metropolitan Park and Recreation District. I've actually only been with the district for about a year and a half. Some people know my predecessor, Perry Barrett. Perry did a lot of land use coordination across the island, a lot of acquisitions, some development projects. But as you probably know the history of the district better than I do, there was a lot of acquisition, and we're sort of now in the more of the focus on maintenance and development of existing sites. New properties are always under consideration, but we do have a lot to manage at this point. Sakai Park is the subject today to talk about. A number of the audience would have been familiar and even part of a process back in 2016 to acquire Sakai Park. And a vote did go in front of citizens or voters here on the island, and it was confirmed to buy with bond funding. The district now pays those bonds back. And I don't mean to get into the ancient history of that, but just that we'll talk about Sakai today, and just to realize that it's been in the district's hands for about 8 or 9 years. In the process, we've looked at different options. We've done a public participation program to really talk about options. And we also applied for a state grant for some of the development of Sakai Park per a concept plan. So today, again, my job is to largely talk about capital projects, help facilitate the process. And one of the pressing or current projects is to develop tennis courts at Sakai Park. And what the current screen shows is some of the announcement to the public, just because that makes it quite real. We do a public land use action notice through the city of Bainbridge Island. We've actually had that process conclude. It was to, as you might even be able to read on the screen, install 2 tennis courts, reconfigure parking. And in the process, we talked to the city about how we plan to make other improvements and got some of the permission in place for that too. We have a permit in hand to develop the tennis courts, the stormwater controls, a little bit of the parking configuration. But that, more excitingly, I'll show you later, has to do with getting a better park entrance. So let me change slides as long as it'll allow. Let's see if I can get to that. Great. The audience is probably quite familiar with Sakai Park, but here's a nice oblique view of it. What we have on the left-hand side of the road, where that roundabout's quite obvious in the bottom left corner, that would be High School Road in Madison. Madison Road traveling north from that roundabout up. You'll have St. Cecilia Church there on the right, and school, which is the red roof buildings. And across the street left is the school campus, largely associated with the high school, but there's also Woodward Middle School. Hopefully you guys are familiar with what you're looking at. You see Sakai Park outlined in a red dotted line. And Sakai Park, on its other side, its eastern boundary would be Highway 305. So hopefully that's giving you the orientation of
Yep,
what we have at Sakai.
it's not the way we normally get to look at it, but there you go. It is,
Yeah. Well,
it
this gives
gives
a
us a
view for
sense of the
those of you
breadth.
who haven't had the benefit of getting out on Sakai. It is now accessible in a couple different ways, but one is that larger wetland complex. You might know that the area was largely farmed, and this area was probably actually man-made to some large extent in terms of the wetland complex that's there now. We classify it as the such and we protect it, but it was largely probably dug for agricultural irrigation purposes, but also for the mining of peat. So that's kind of one of the interesting history parts of Sakai, and probably most interesting, including its name being that the property came from the Sakai family, which had a long history on the island of doing strawberry farming on this parcel and other parcels. Hence, the Sakai name is on a couple pieces in this vicinity, like Sakai Village, just to the north, which are townhome complex there. So hopefully this gave enough orientation to where we are. I gave you a little bit of the history that it came to the district in 2016. This is a graphic to help highlight how the property, so if you just kind of go back to the way we're looking at it, right? Same angle, but now with a conceptual drawing, really a schematic drawing is as we call it. This shows the same parcel boundaries in dark green, but it's starting to show the trail network that's now across the property. So basically what I'm doing is I'm just giving you that orientation and sense of what's there, right? And that hopefully gives you the context for future projects. What is there, again, is a trail network. You can actually notice in the top bottom right-hand corner a dotted blue line. That is the improved 10-foot wide asphalt beginning of the Sound to Olympics Trail. That is a large endeavor. It is a regional effort to connect our entire area from the ferry terminal, which it does largely link to, ferry terminal all the way to the Discovery Trail on the Olympic Peninsula. This would be a cross-regional trail, obviously across different counties and largely coordinated through state projects. So you're seeing on Sakai really the entrance to, or really the terminus of the existing Sound to Olympics Trail. That dotted blue line brings users now into the park. So that is kind of the back door into the park. But that is where the asphalt ends. And the rest of our park does not have asphalt. And so there's a lot of sensitive areas and protection on Sakai that makes asphalt a challenge. The Sound to Olympics Trail is not to come into the park as you might think it might per this graphic. It has been considered, but a preference is for it to stay largely in the right-of-way of 305. That preference is beyond the park district. There are residents who have spoken through the city's portal. The city of Bainbridge Islands had a survey, but the preference is even the state's preference, commuters' preference. They really aren't looking for circuitous routes through parks. So the Sound to Olympics Trail, which is just something to keep on your radar, is something that'll come across probably the very western boundary of Sakai. Nobody wants the Sound to Olympics Trail to be right on the highway, at least not most users. It may include a little bit of the crossing of the pond, but only ever so slightly on the western edge. So again, what we have at Sakai right now is trail system with two entrances, one being the Sound to Olympics Trail, the other, if you shift your view over to the far west side where that letter P is, that is the existing park entrance, which is a gravel driveway. It's kind of good to point that out because the existing driveway is inadequate. It is also not aligned with the road access, which is asphalt across the street leading over to the Bainbridge Island School District admin building and to our aquatic center. So you'll see on a plan, including this project plan, an effort to improve that intersection and actually align them. Do you want me to pause in case there's a question?
Well, I think this is laying out the history very well. I don't know that there's any particular question at this point. I do appreciate the idea that we have a few places on the island where those intersections don't align very well, and that can cause a lot of traffic difficulty. Go ahead.
Okay. So now I'm talking a little bit still about existing conditions. I'll try not to be on this too long, but some of you don't have that benefit of having been down into the wetland complex, where we do innovative construction, including this pier that you're looking at, which is a boardwalk, but it's actually built plank by plank so that we don't touch the water. They're built onto pins, which also means we're not putting foundations into the water. The pin is like a piece of metal that actually reaches out in a tripod fashion into the ground. And so it's really carefully done not to bring a bulldozer or any kind of land disturbance, and to place this kind of structure where it's needed to cross wetlands. So you saw the trail network. It includes this boardwalk. On the right-hand side, only through the rose bushes can you notice some of the waters, but I thought to give you a little highlight of the area, especially for those with mobility challenges and haven't been able to get down the hill to see this. We have actually developed accessible trails up on the property. And so don't have to really perfectly orientate you to where these are. It's just a sense of what's available for users. On the left-hand side is the Sound to Olympic Trail. It is where it says bike route ends ahead because you get to Sakai. This route in the future, again, will be extended likely around 305. That is not funded, by the way. That project has gotten funding to take it through construction documentation, and that's actually a big lift. That's an expensive thing with wetlands and how to build crossings. So they will have a project ready for funding, which is exciting. It will actually take it all the way up to Madison, meaning it'll go up by the old Harrison Hospital, the now police station. It will at least get to that intersection once there is funding, but at least this will be well positioned for that. And on the right-hand side, you can see a trail network. If you remember in that concept, there's a bit of a loop trail, natural trails around the flat prairie-like area of Sakai, the uplands. This trail happens to be going through a forest of alder. Alder is that one a kind of show-up tree. It's not a tree that we actually try to preserve on our park properties. This is going through an alder forest. That alder forest, again, is nice. But some of it's being removed for the tennis courts, some of it's being removed for road improvements on Madison. So just to give you a sense, this little trail is a loop. You get some shade, but the alders are not the perfect shade tree or experience. So you're starting to see here Madison Avenue and what is happening with it getting widened. And about the location there on the left of the bulldozer is where the new park entrance will be. A little bit, I should say the bulldozer, but it's really closer to where the conduit box is, that piece of concrete. The telephone pole that's there is going to be removed. We had to create an easement across Sky Park for Puget Sound Energy. So that's just one of those, I bring that up because the concept, sometimes people are like, why don't you just put the road there? Well, there's usually a utility involved, and there's usually a fire or safety issue, and that's certainly the case here. The conduit that's there is largely because there's going to be a sewer line installed along Madison. There is not one on this side of the road, and it's quite exciting for those properties that will now have a sewer main. We will have a sewer main and a water tie-off in the ground at our park entrance. And that's very valuable. Not that we have large development plans, but our property is largely undeveloped without any utilities other than electric going to the Sakai home. Don't need to speak about the Sakai home particularly, but if you're interested, there is a life estate on the Sakai Park. On the right-hand side, Sakai entrance, again, a little bit off kilter from the intersection into the aquatic center, which is where the picture's taken from the school district property. You can see our gravel entrance, and you can also see that family crossing without a crosswalk. Very alarming to all of us. So we're really hopeful that we'll see this new intersection within a year, which will be doubly crosswalked, and it'll have safe passage, and obviously we'll have an improved entrance, which will be an asphalt apron into the park. And then the new entrance about where that telephone pole is will just circuitously turn back to gravel and come back around to the back of the park, which right now is one of the only true parking areas towards the back of the park. This front park entrance area is just casual parking, and it does not work well, I'm willing to admit.
So we've been using the park because of this new arrival quite a
Yes.
bit lately.
Right. So the crowds are really coming across Sakai, parking quite often because of our very attractive, I've heard 15,000 visitors a year come to see our trolls. This is Pia. I bet a lot of you have heard all about Pia, but she's had a year at Sakai. And like I said, the numbers are astounding of how much visiting she gets. I don't have any other statistics for you. I don't even know currently, I don't really know her size, but I'll tell you, I think she's about 25 to 25 feet tall. I can't say for sure. She's made of pallets, so recycled wood that didn't get cut from trees. It's important environmental message involved. And Pia has really drawn an interest.
Yeah, we earlier talked with Don Janow, one of the commissioners, about Pia early on, and that video we'll link to if you're watching this later in the links below in YouTube.
Great. Well, Pia was hidden among the trees up in the upper uplands. So if you were thinking about the park entrance, that driveway into the park, she's to the north. She's hidden on purpose so that you had to find her and discover her. And it's been fun to see that, to see people do scavenger hunts and troll signage and even art installations. Some bird houses went up to help indicate, oh, she loves the birds, follow the bird houses. That kind of messaging happened. So I'm just showing this again before I talk about where the tennis courts are located. I hope it made sense. If you're seeing the P, you realize that's the driveway in. Pia to the north of that. The tennis courts will be to the south of that in the alder forest area. Here is a view. I'll try to get more specific, but it shows the driveway and it shows the installation of the tennis courts. It does not show Pia's location. Again, that's supposed to be kind of secret. I'll try to indicate what the different improvements are, but the tennis courts do have very limited but designated parking that's coming. That parking is just that little box. We'll get a better view of it in a moment, but a little square to the right of the courts that will be paved, a large part paved for ADA accessibility. It'll take users right on to a paved small walkway that then lets them walk into the courts or even up to the driveway. Accessibility is part of any one of our projects, so that's an important parking addition. This project also has sheet water that will come off the courts. That's really important for us to address. So if you're able to tell in this graphic, I'll change it to the next. There is something to collect the stormwater. It's this oval-like rectangle to the right. That is a rain garden and is one of the better practices now. Instead of having concrete basins and holding water spaces, we work with nature, but it's rather significant in size. So that would be almost the trade-off. But what you can't really tell in the graphic is that the tennis courts and the rain garden are bordering a kind of rounded edge, and that rounded edge is actually a stream buffer. So when I mention that we have sensitive lands, they include things like the headwaters of streams that have salmons. And that is exactly what's happened just south of Sakai Park. It's the headwaters. Some people consider it drainage water, but I will say that it is designated by the city as a stream, and a stream that that supports fish, and that requires a 200-foot buffer. So part of Sakai Park is set aside for stream buffer, and we weren't to develop in it. You can see just how tight it becomes to get tennis courts and a rain garden on this side of the driveway. A lot of people would like to have a public process about where to place the courts, but really the options were quite limited. So that's something to highlight. There are a few other graphics which don't read well on the screen here, but this current project is to build the tennis courts, the rain garden, the parking for the tennis courts, and the new entrance to the park, which is that black area just to the north. I hope you're following and seeing that project.
Yeah, I see there are a couple of questions. Is this a convenient time?
Sure, absolutely.
Sheila?
Yeah, Matthew, just a question. What to the left of the rain garden, I guess the oval shaped pond looking place, to the left of that, what is that? Can you go back to the other screen?
Yeah, I don't know if
not there, but to the left of there, between that and the cliffs and the courts. Keep going over there, that part.
This is the rain garden.
That's the rain garden?
Yeah, it's white blank space.
This is the pond then over here?
No, I'm sorry that it gets a little bit confusing. So there are other improvements to come, and this, which I would have described in a little while, but it gets confusing. This is a play area. It is a natural skate play area. So what you're basically looking at is wood chips surrounding a piece of wood for children 3 to 5, but anyone could utilize. So it's a future play space. We don't have a playground at Sakai. One of the things we do when we have a tennis court and parking and a future restroom, it's nice to have different generations be able to use the facilities, families come, so there will be a small play area installed. That's not happening in 2024. We will be hopefully seeing that improvement as part of 2025. And when I mentioned earlier that if you took the driveway to its end, you get to a very informal parking area in the back. In 2025, again, not this year, we intend to formalize that and to not a paved parking, but definitely a better oriented one with turnaround for safety. So this is a future improvement. There is a restroom planned as opposed to the porta potty that will be installed temporarily. The restroom is our standards and they've been well received. It's a permanent structure, precast elsewhere, and they're durable and lasting, and we've had success with them. So this project, the tennis courts and rain garden and its small parking area, are part of 2024. And in 2025 or later, when the funding and other things are in place, including permits, we will do a play area, a restroom, and improved parking at the back of the lot, back of the park.
So in the short term, the parking will be as it is pictured here, but not in an improved fashion?
That's right. Thanks for clarifying that. It'll be the rather informal parking area that's in the back. And then the front end of the park has that unimproved parking area. I think while we wait to be able to do more, that'll probably remain.
Okay,
So,
and
yes,
it looks like
existing
Carolyn,
parking will stay.
and a question from Carolyn.
It seems to me that you are totally forgetting the fact that the Sakai family actually still lives on the property, and where you're going to put parking is right practically on top of their home.
Mhm.
I don't understand that concept whatsoever.
Yeah, thanks for the sensitivity. I appreciate that. The parking area, and it's a good chance, I don't know that I can allay your concern, but the parking area for improvement is actually already a turnaround gravel area.
Yeah, I
And
know that.
It is utilized by park users. We've blockaded it temporarily. But that has been in place for a number of years. It does lead to the Sakai residents. And so I appreciate your sensitivity about that. We aren't really changing the amount of users or the space with this program that we've set aside previously and coordinated somewhat. I don't know if you feel satisfactory with the Sakai family. There's one individual living in the home. It's not my business to talk about that, but I'll just say that we haven't been presented with a concern or problem with the family and this project. The Sakai residents will become part of the park property. There is no intention to hold it by the family. There's just one resident living in it.
Yes, that's very nice and all, except even one resident. It could be you, it could be me. Probably it's a very elderly member of the family. And I know the park intimately. I've been going there for a number of years and seeing these changes that do not agree with me.
Mhm.
But to me, there's no consideration of the situation. The younger members of the family are the ones who have gotten rid of the property. Other people were overruled, and perhaps the person in the home was overruled. I think it would be a very kind gesture and make you better publicity if you had a direct spokesman to speak with the resident and so on. And I know that cars go in and out to the home, so family members do visit. It seems to me there needs to be some consideration with all that. And I
Thank you.
will have other comments later.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't have a lot left to show. I thought it was interesting to make a larger view of the tennis court striping. I know we'd be like, why? What's the point of that? We want this court to be compliant with the USTA. We have a local tennis community that's very excited about these courts. They're actually doing the fundraising for half of the construction cost. So with that tennis community's enthusiasm, there's this idea that these are going to be their premier courts, potentially meeting all of the USTA standards. USTA standards are varied. I'm not going to go over them, but the striping was the one that kind of made some fun to share. In blue lines, particularly with inside the court, you start to see the shape of a smaller court, and that is the junior sized tennis courts. So for those who, and I don't have the age memorized, but I think it's up to age 13, they have a thing called junior tennis. So that's a blue stripe area. And again, this would be kind of hard to fully explain without better graphics, but I'll say that there's even a smaller court involved. So they're talking 3 different courts here. And if you're looking at this left to right, you're seeing the standard court. Then I mentioned the interior one for junior. But at the far ends, they're able to accommodate what's known as the very young tennis, and they use a different setup. Their nets obviously are much smaller in height and width. Their paddles or their rackets are really more like paddles, and their balls more like a wiffle softball. But this is a way to actually see. Thank you.
I was going to say that sounds a little bit like pickleball.
It does sound a little like pickleball, but it's endorsed by the tennis USTA. And it's actually a way for us to do programming, as well as the local tennis association, where they want to bring out young, meaning 5-year-olds like my kids were when they played on those tiny spots. And then they grow into the junior and obviously into full-time tennis. My son now goes to UW and can hit that ball like crazy.
Okay, so one of the things I mentioned pickleball because I know that there's been some challenges for tennis players, and they've expressed concern to the Parks Department about how pickleball took over some of the spaces that they were playing. Is pickleball part of the pressure here?
I will say that pickleball and tennis definitely have had some competition for use. And in that process, where we have a large group of pickleball players at Battle Point Park, they want to expand, and they do expand onto the tennis courts and use them. That is a pressure point, that there is that much interest in pickleball at Battle Point Park. And I think it really is because they're known as the founders courts, and it draws a big crowd. Pickleball is popular everywhere. There are other tennis courts where there are pickleball users trying to use them. That is not going to be ruled out here. But this is designated tennis, whereas they know it hasn't worked out so well at Battle Point because they're underutilized by tennis. There is then the pickleballers ready to use it because they're already there waiting for the other courts. And
Right.
So this is not going to have adjacent pickleball court next to it. So part of the theory is that it reduces the pressure on the tennis courts, and that these tennis courts, being particularly brand new, will be prized by the tennis community, and then again we'll be able to better program them. So I hope that helps answer your question. As this court gets built, the tennis courts at Battle Point Park will likely become more and more for pickleball. There is not an absolute to that, but as you identified, there is this constant desire to use the courts by pickleball. Pickleball really wants to expand. And so the tennis community is quite happy about there being, at least I don't want to speak for them, but the idea that they'd have dedicated tennis courts. In some respects, this is a replacement for the 2 courts that often are used by pickleball at Battle Point. Do you guys follow that and where Battle Point Park is? I bet you guys know.
Yeah, that's good to know. So I know that there are some other park areas. Was there a reason that when you were looking at where to put these tennis courts, you decided on Sakai?
I would say that it's largely because it's a central area for close to Winslow. For those who call it, they are downtown Winslow. It is also not far from the high school tennis courts where people do go to play tennis. But when those courts are taken by school programs or even our programs, it's nice that there's a nearby tennis court that they can go to. The tennis courts are closed, obviously, when the school district's using them. So there's a little bit of the user location that makes some sense. And also, most probably importantly from my perspective, we talked about what we would do at Sakai in a public process and showed it to our state funders, and it showed a tennis court. So we have made a commitment to tennis for quite a number of years to happen at Sakai Park.
Okay, and can I then ask maybe about, you mentioned the idea of a tot lot almost, a small playground. Are there other things that you're considering for the park in the long term?
I will answer that question. Let me just finish on this tennis courts. So if you don't mind, I'll just say the last thing to update everyone on is that when we develop a project, we have to do a public bid process. It's by law, and it's also just for fair competition and to do the most we can with taxpayer dollars. So we go out to bid with a project and we design it with specifications and people can bid on it. We just opened those bids and found the low bid to be not quite a Bainbridge Island based company, but a local company. And we're really excited. The board will be awarding the contract, at least per their agenda, this Thursday. And that will get the construction company able to tell us their schedule. And it's an interesting project because it's not just putting down asphalt, but it's actually sealing it properly. And then it's a very special surface that it requires to do this. And the company that has come forward is an expert at it. So they have both asphalt expertise and especially tennis court surfacing. So that was a great thing that not only were they the low bidder, but very qualified to do the work. And we do anticipate that they will be working before the wet season and completing before the wet season, which is generally mid-October. The tennis courts will have a 10-foot fence around them. Just to give you more lay of that, and it was a choice in the bid process, but the tennis community again wants to fundraise for what they consider the right standard, not a lower 8-foot fence like we see on other tennis courts. I mentioned the rain garden that's adjacent to the tennis courts. On the left, it's a black and white drawing that's really just a standard, but it's what we submitted to the city. And this kind of thing gets studied through what we call specifications, and they look at what kind of soil, how does it percolate, what is it plants. So there's a lot more details than the concept drawing. But I thought it was worth showing you a little bit of this concept because it is going to take up a good portion of the park, but it will also look like a natural detention area. And you can see a little bit of how they work to the right in a graphic, and that they are based with gravel, retention soil, and the plantings. The sheet water will come by way of a small little swale to our rain garden. You see a picture of one in a park setting to the right. And then you asked me about the playground. Oh, first, I guess this is just a little bit more about the tennis courts. These are post for the surveying. People are able to go out and see, okay, I see where the rain garden is. I see where the tennis court corner is. A little hard to really speak to without the map and pinpointing it, but you're generally looking at right here where the rain garden is going to be located. And the tennis court is essentially right where those trees begin. Those are alder largely. There's a telephone pole for those of you who actually go out there, and you'll be able to say, ah, I see right behind the telephone pole, the northeast corner of the courts. And then you're able to go 90 feet to the other direction and start to envision it better. But you asked me a little bit about the playground. This stake shows the very southern portion of the play area. We are looking at our natural play like we do elsewhere. So that's kind of an example picture from south on the island. But what I'm kind of pleased to share with you is that there is a respect for the existing orchard of trees, and you're starting to see them there. There's a mixture of apple, cherry. I don't know the species myself well, but I think it's a gorgeous orchard. So the play area is going to be nestled up into it without disturbing its root structures. I think it should really come out in the end as a lovely space to have children play, but also for families to be able to picnic in an orchard. The parking area, again, is adjacent to it, so it's going to be quite convenient with a future restroom. So that gives you a little bit about the play area with the chips around it. You get a little sense of what things might look like with an orchard behind it. And I think then I can get back to your previous question.
Yeah, I know I've seen situations like that. I think you have a little park that's along Ferncliff that has just some easy to climb structures, kind of a low key playing area.
And natural materials, yeah. But yeah, Reed, you asked me a question and I'm sorry that I didn't track it that well.
Oh, I was just saying that you're laying out this and you sort of hinted that there might be other ideas being percolated beyond what you have permitted today.
Ah, right. Well, I made some references to a concept plan that was done in the past that mentioned tennis courts. So the tennis courts were definitely part of that concept plan. That concept plan, when developed, actually showed a lot of potential opportunities. It was before all the information was in about sensitive areas like that stream buffer. In fact, the stream buffer may not have been there at the time of the concept plan. So it showed facilities in areas that are now no longer possible, for one. When we got the state grant, we also committed to outdoor recreation. And while that's a wonderful thing, it does also limit the number and spaces for indoor facilities. So the concept plan that I'm referring to, I don't have the year memorized, but it showed a lot of different indoor facilities. It showed an environmental center. It showed an indoor rec center. It had space for the Bainbridge Island Metropolitan Park District offices. It even had a bit of a field house, which would be an indoor athletic facility different than a recreation center. All of those were concepts. They were never really cited. The utilities haven't been present for such things anyway, much less the grants wouldn't allow that much or the land. But they were concepts to accommodate ideas for the park. What we have to do by way of our grant is have active recreation like tennis. We also have to have passive recreation like we have with the wood trails. So we're in compliance. We're also working on fulfilling our concept plan. This district would explain and has explained that a lot of the things that were concepts for Sakai have been addressed. They've been addressed particularly in other locations. So we have a recreation center on the island now. So at the time of the Sakai concept plan, there was a need and a desire to have one, but that has been, by some people's opinion, quite fulfilled by the purchase of the Bainbridge Island Athletic Club, now known as the Burke. So we have a rec center, and the admin building or administrative needs have been met also at the Burke. And there are other facilities that we own already in place that could also house our administration or public meetings. So I would tell you that the needs have certainly changed, and the interest of users has changed as they've gotten out into this prairie-like environment in the wetland complex. And there's a lot of interest in the natural experience at Sakai. If the site was to be developed, I can't foresee what that exactly would be. It'd be a public process to decide. But you heard that Madison will have utilities. If there was ever to be a building, it would most likely be quite contained and facing Madison. So that's just something, to be honest, that the district would have the ability to probably develop along Madison a facility, but it would be quite limited given a number of interest and even grant restrictions.
Yeah, that earlier concept, which I think was, again, about the time that the bond was passed, a little bit after that, was pretty extensive and had a lot of development on that property. And I, for one, have enjoyed the idea of a place pretty close to town that you can walk and enjoy the wetlands. And I feel like it's very valuable the way it is to have outdoor space.
It's really nice to be able to get from corner to corner of the park right now on trails and really have diverse landscapes. And I think the more people who use that, the more appreciation there is for what is there.
Sheila, you have a comment or question?
I have a comment regarding that. Our walking group has often done that walk, and it's just a lovely, lovely walk. So we appreciate that very much. There's different areas that the lesser of us can walk easier, And it's been very pleasant. I appreciate that. I want to ask, does you have anything up at Strawberry Hill anymore?
There's quite a bit at Strawberry Hill Park. There is a single tennis court there, if that was one of the more relevant questions. But Strawberry Hill Park is a place of quite a bit of development. In fact, you might know it as where we have athletic fields. We also have a center where people can come and take art classes. We used to have our administrative building there. That building is mothballed. It's an old Army building back from the 60s. It's not going to remain. It's not really tall. It's not really up to any kind of code. But what is exciting at Strawberry Hill Park is that it has expanded with donations, and we have largened our dog park, and we now have a bike park, which is really for mountain bikers to learn and to have a somewhat of a tree experience. So we're protecting the forest with appropriate thinning, but yet there will be a mountain bike park in the near future. It's already been through permitting. So athletic fields, bike park, dog park, tennis courts, and a future expansion of a skate park. It's actually where we have significant parking. It's where community events do take place and people can gather. So Strawberry Hill Park is a developed, much more so than Sakai. It's also very active.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? I really appreciate your time, Matthew, and laying this all out, and I'll be watching this again to get a sense. It's a development that might have, as I said at the beginning, been overshadowed. And if I wanted to follow the progress, is there a website that you're keeping up to date on BI Parks, or?
Yeah, our site, biparks.org, always has a current project tab where people can see what's going on. It happens to be under another tab called public information. So you kind of have to poke around just a little bit. But if you're like, I want to know what's going on, think I want public information, then current projects.
Great. We appreciate your time, and we will be in touch.
I appreciate your time, and thank you everyone for your interest.